Welcome to Aircrew Interview. I'm Mike Young, your host, and this episode we chat with Craig Penrice as he talks about flying the RAF Lightning, the F-15 Eagle on his US Air Force exchange, and testing the Typhoon. He also includes his two ejection stories, the first being on the English Electric Lightning and the second on the Hawker Hunter. If you like what we do here over at Aircrew Interview and would like to support us and help us grow, you can head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/aircrewinterview where you can donate monthly. We have different tiers ranging from $1 per month right up to $25, with each tier offering different rewards. All the monthly donations greatly help us to continue creating these video and audio interviews, so please take a look and I thank you in advance. Enjoy. Okay, so Craig, when did you first become interested in aviation?
When I was a schoolboy. Growing up in Glasgow, my mum and dad's house was right under the approach path to Glasgow Airport. So seeing Viscounts, Vanguards, the early jets coming in and out, always kindled an interest in aviation, civil aviation at that time, but that's where it all started.
So can you talk us through when you joined the RAF and what some of the aircraft you trained on?
Yeah, I had a bent for civil aviation, but the first oil crisis meant that there were no places to be had anywhere. So kind of against the grain, I applied to join the Air Force and eventually was accepted. During my time at university, I flew on the Bulldog T1. I got a lot of flying and a very poor degree out of that. Over 200 hours of flying in 4 years at university. Then off to officer training at Cranwell and the Jet Provost Mark V. Introducing to that, a year or so doing that, and then across the valley on the Hawk, which was still pretty new in those days. It was replacing the Hunters at that time. Hawk at Valley, then Hawk at Chivener, and having won the best bombing student prize, I was sent to the Lightning air defence airplane. Makes sense, obviously.
Yeah. So obviously we're going to talk about the Lightning now, an amazing aircraft. So did you choose this initially? Would you wanted to go that route, even though you were good at bombing?
My sort of iconic airplane had always been the Buccaneer. Okay. Variously going fishing with my dad in the Scottish Lake, seeing Royal Navy Buccaneers at ridiculously low heights over the lake had hooked me. But the course you go through, the instructors there decide on your best abilities and your best platform to be sent to, also matching the needs of the Air Force. So it was the Lightning for me, and I could not have been happier, as it turned out, in the long run.
Brilliant. So can you talk us through some of your initial training on the Lightning? How different was it coming from these, like the Jet Provost?
It was hugely different. The Lightning, because it had a radar, there was nothing in the training fleet that equips you or gives you an insight into what working with a radar is like. The mental gymnastics required to calculate the crossing angles and the closure rates, heights and elevations and all those things. That is a completely new set of tricks. Flying training prepares you for takeoff, landing, fighting, but the radar was a completely black art.
Yeah. We have to talk about its amazing performance. Can you remember your first reheat takeoff?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously there's 3 different marks of Lightning, the single seat Mark III, the 2-seat Mark V and the single seat Mark VI. Obviously you start in the 2-seater, squashed in side by side with your instructor. And the first trip is a reheat takeoff, just to, I guess, put you in your place, recognise how far behind the airplane you're going to be. But then it quickly becomes just natural. It's quite amazing how quickly you get used to certain things, even though they are a big step forward in terms of the physical feelings, the accelerations, etc. But it just becomes, that's what you do. That's your job, yeah.
So can you talk us through some of the handling characteristics, and also how did it do in DACT of the types at the time?
The aeroplane was a lovely aeroplane to fly, but it was never designed to be an agile fighter. It was there to be an interceptor, get off the ground quickly, get up high, get up fast, and meet the incoming bomber force. I guess I joined the fleet quite late on, and we had a lot of restrictions in terms of the amount of G we were allowed to pull because the airframes were getting old. Cockpit was quite difficult to see out of, so DACT was hard work. On your own it was very hard work. As a pair you could work well together and hold your own, but there's no doubting when I was on the Lightning fleet it was coming towards the end of its days, and there were far better radars out there, there were far better performing airplanes out there. We had our work cut out.
Because you went from, as 82 to 87, would you say it was a capable platform to do its job at that time?
Absolutely. I mean, the primary job that we were doing was the quick reaction alert, the air defence of the southern half of the UK. We took our turns doing that, and yeah, you can get the jet going incredibly quickly, be off the ground in 3 minutes from getting to the ladder. And there was various times where we intercepted a Learjet that was depressurised with an unconscious crew. Lots of lost private pilots, lots of variety in that. And when you're woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a snowy winter's night and the snowplow has cleared one little strip down the runway, that gets your attention when you're hurtling down in your 20 tons of aluminium.
I can imagine, yeah. We also had a bit of an incident in the lightning. Could you tell us about this?
Yeah, you can say it was an incident. Other people would say it was an accident. Flying along quite happily, making the last turn towards home as we were always short of fuel. I moved the control column to bank to the left, and the control column kept on moving. And the airplane did as it was told, so very quickly went into a nose-low spiral dive. Speed picking up very quickly. I couldn't move the stick. I tried a few switches to isolate hydraulics and things, but that didn't help. And then there was literally no thought process. It was, if that's happening, I have to eject. I pulled the handle, and my next memory after that is sitting in the helicopter that had rescued me about an hour and a half later.
Really?
So I've been bobbing around in the North Sea, severely broken right elbow and broken left knee from purely the speed that I left the airplane at, over 500 miles an hour. But the most threatening thing was hypothermia. I was really, really cold. And that was the thing that was likely to kill me. The broken bones weren't, but I was luckily picked up with a helicopter, taken back to Binbrook where we were based, and then later that night onto the RAF hospital at Ely, where I spent quite a while when they put pins and plates and put me back together again. I remember hearing the doctors over here say, "Wait, you'll be lucky to walk again, you'll never fly again." I said, "No, I'll show you, I'll show you."
And you certainly did.
I did. It took a while, but I did.
Certainly an eventful thing in the lightning to happen, but a few of our viewers have seen the boots nailed to the plaque. Could you tell us about this?
Yeah, the boots comes from the officers' mess bar at RAF Binbrook. Anybody who survived an ejection, when they came back, would have their boots and be hoisted up to the ceiling. Nail your boots on there, and undoubtedly drink lots of beer and buy lots of beer for everybody else. And then, sadly, when Binbrook was shut down, what did we do with that piece of aviation history? And there was a local pub, the Blacksmith's Arms, that we often used to frequent. We often used to get locked in there. And the brilliant idea was, why don't we relocate the boots? So we gathered all the rightful owners, or most of the owners, not all were still around, and took the boots down, marched them across and plonked them on the wall to the Blacksmith's Arms. I'm not sure if they're still there, to be honest. But,
worth having a look, maybe.
Well, yeah, go back one day.
So, overall, did you enjoy your time in the lightning?
I did. I mean, as a first operational platform for a young pilot, so much to teach you about airmanship, looking after yourself as a single-seat pilot, looking after your fuel, because you were always short of fuel in an aeroplane that was, an engineering nightmare. Things often didn't work as they were meant to. Yeah. So a great maturing platform. It set you up well for future airmanship in the Air Force.
Then something special happened to you. You got on an exchange to America flying the F-15. How did this even come about?
Well, there's a bit of a 3-year gap in there. So I went to be an instructor on the Hawk first. So that sort of qualifies you to be a bit of multi-role and instructional background. A lot of the exchange positions required the instructor category to go and do it. Yep. And it's the thing, every year you have your appraisals and you say, what would you like to do next? And I always said, I'd like to do an exchange tour, please. And there's only a set number of them. You can kind of manipulate yourself into the right ballpark. And I was lucky enough to get to fly the F-15 air defense variant, the A and B model in Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida as an instructor. So on a training squadron there.
Yeah. So you were an instructor, but I was a bit confused. Why do the US Air Force need an instructor from another country that hasn't flown there on the type before?
Variety is the spice of life, I think we say. It's the interchange of thinking and procedures and methods. It's always good to have a different viewpoint on things. And the exchange program is much lower now than it was, but there was something like 45 RAF pilots on exchange posts in the US, and there was equal number of US guys in the States, and Australia and Canada, Holland. There's a whole range of it, just to have that intermingling amongst NATO nations, to have that understanding. So a guy who's done an exchange tour comes back into his home Air Force and understands why they're doing it that way, because we're not all the same.
Yeah. So what were your first initial thoughts on the F-15, and what was the training like?
So, wow, this huge, roomy cockpit that you were sitting on top of, you could see out of, coming from the Lightning before that, where you were hemmed in there. You know, it was the cockpit was ergonomically laid out. There was plenty of space, and it had a radar that was just amazing compared to my Lightning radar that could see mid-20s miles. This thing was seeing 40 miles plus, and it just made life very different. It was a challenge going to learn to fly the airplane and then immediately becoming an instructor on it without the sort of operational squadron experience. But you know, the airplane, completely awesome.
And what model was this? Was this the A and the B at the time?
It was the A and B when I first arrived, but during my time there, the squadron transitioned to Cs and Ds, and various different software upgrades in the intervening periods as well. But so, flown all four of the air defence models.
So, can you tell us about your first flight? How did it feel, you know, sitting in the back of like another amazing aircraft?
Sit in the front, not the back.
Oh, wow.
You get to sit in the front as you're going through your convex, and yeah, the whole thing is summed up by two nations separated by a common language. The getting used to American Air Force way of doing things. You go, what does he mean? Oh, I know. Yeah, okay, right. But yeah, flying in Florida in an airplane, that was the top of the league at the time, and been given that privilege representing the Royal Air Force in a way, and representing the UK in other ways. A great honour and a privilege.
So, did you ever get to do a vertical climb like the Lightning in the F-15?
Yes, we did. Not as often as we did it in the Lightning. And is it vertical? It was nearly vertical.
Nearly, yeah.
Yeah, but I can't remember what the name of it. They had a special name, sort of code word that said, "This is we're not going to tell everybody what we're going to do, but we're going to do."
Right.
What was it? Anyway, where you were away from home. And not being frowned upon by the senior officers, you could enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah. So let's talk about the F-15's handling characteristics. How did it compare to the Lightning, for instance?
Generally speaking, it was absolutely perfect airplane to fly. Digital flight controls, force sensor as opposed to moving the stick around. It was very well coordinated. There were certain aspects, if you had sort of slightly asymmetric fuel and you were a little bit aggressive, it could bite you and it would flick a little bit. But generally speaking, it was very predictable, which is always good. An airplane you pull 9G in, massive wing, great performance. But yeah, there's no real vices in the airplane for the majority of it.
So how did it do in DACT, assuming you did it against the types at the time in America?
Yeah, part of the instructor working was to go in things like red flag, green flag, so we did get to participate in those exercises. And the strength of the Eagle comes in its working as a team. When you've got a 4-ship of Eagles with their radars all coordinated, you're pretty much invincible.
Yeah.
You know what's happening out there. As long as you understood the picture that you were seeing and reacted the way you knew you should, then you're king of the castle.
Yeah. So was the cockpit well laid out, would you say? And did the air differ right up to the C?
There was very little difference between the A, B, C and D in terms of what you were looking at. Still analog gauges, a radar screen in there, a head-up display. It was still a fairly basic airplane by modern standards, but yeah, well laid out, unlike the Lightning, which was a bucket of switches thrown in and wherever they landed, that was it. This was, things were in sensible places.
Yeah. So let's talk about your role as an instructor. So what would be like an average day flying, and what would you be doing?
The day before, the schedule would go up. The squadron typically flew 2 waves a day. The sorties were probably an hour and a half or so in length. So you would it'd be very unusual to fly in both waves. Sometimes there was a 3-wave day, you fly first and last. The approach that they had in the school was a very disciplined, you will always start briefing 2 hours before takeoff, you will always stop briefing an hour before takeoff. You'll cover lots of stuff, whereas the RAF way is a lot more, well, I'll brief you because I know what you need, not because we've got the regulation that says we've got to brief all these things.
Yeah.
You know, get your G-suit on, pick up your life jacket and your helmet and get in the bus and be driven out to the flight line. Never cross the red line on the concrete. You've got to go in through the hole, even though it's there. Crew chief, very smart salute, very proud of his airplane, hand it over to you. A lot of the sorties were flown with me flying in a single-seat airplane and the student flying in another single-seat airplane.
Right.
So there's very few backseat instructional sorties. Things like the first night flying, the first tanking sortie, first gunnery sortie were all 2-seat ones, but generally you were flying in a single-seat airplane, which always makes it nicer.
Yeah. And it must be nice having that extra fuel coming from the Lightning.
Oh yeah, my word. Luxury in terms of almost going transcontinental America on one tank of fuel. It was pretty nice.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you fitted over there. Like, did you fit in well with the Americans? Did you get any jip?
You suddenly find yourself being the font of all knowledge about the history of your country and the politics of your country, which I don't think I really was. But no, the guys are incredibly appreciative of different viewpoints. In any squadron, you get on better with some than you do with others, and you've got some very good and long-lasting friends come from the exchange tour there.
Yeah. And what squadron were you actually based with?
It was the Boneheads, the 95th. Started off as Tactical Fighter Training Squadron, but it changed its name 3 times, and then there was the 95th Fighter Squadron by the time I left. So lots of different badges.
Wow, yeah. And obviously you probably have many, but could you tell us some memorable stories you have to our viewers?
Aeroplane ones or on the ground ones? Aeroplane ones. So interesting one with a student at night. We'd been off doing intercepts, we'd been to a tanker, and I was leading him back to base, and so he's rejoining on me in the dark, and you can see the lights coming alongside, and he gets about 100 yards behind me, and then suddenly the blue and the green light change sides. You go, uh-oh, and then he starts plummeting down. He just got completely disorientated with the horizon and the starlight, and calmly say, roll, not any direction, just roll the airplane, stop, right, pull, and got him back up there. It was a little bit of a heart-stopping moment, but it was pretty drama-free. I think there was nothing.
It's probably what you want.
It's what you want, really. You've got to be careful with students.
So how often would you fly over there?
Probably 3-4 times a week. Yeah, it's quite good. In my 3 years there, I got a little over 500 hours. My buddy who went to the Marine Corps flew F-18s, got 1,000 hours at the same time. So different approach to flying hours and generations on it, but 500 quality flying hours.
Yeah. So how long did you spend over there, and did you enjoy it?
Just short of 3 years we were across there. Yeah, absolutely. Living on the beach in Florida. In the few days when the secret no foreign flag got raised, I would say thank you very much, I'm off, and get my boat out, cold beer, and sit and watch the sunset and the dolphins swimming in the bay. So it had its compensations.
What was the most difficult aircraft to go up against in the F-15?
F-16, I think, was always a challenge. It's small, quite hard to see visually when you get into that stage. The big mouth F-16s had a pretty good performance themselves, and it was never a clear cut who's going to win. You had to do the right thing, and he had to make a mistake to make it a clear cut win either way. But F-16 was tricky. There was always hundreds of them as well, it seemed like.
So how did the flight gear differentiate compared to the UK?
I always felt a little bit insecure in American flight gear. The helmet in particular felt pretty fragile and flimsy compared to our helmets. Obviously it's a torso harness rather than strapping into the seat, so it's a bit cumbersome getting that on, but it meant strapping in was quicker. G-suit's pretty much the same, really.
So after this you went back to Valley, and then could you explain what happened after this?
Yeah, after the F-15, I had wanted a Tornado billet of some description, but there were none available, so they wanted to use my instructional background and put me towards Valley to do that. Out of the blue, a telephone call from an old friend saying, did you know we're looking for people to become test pilots who've got single seat and high-tech air defence experience? Well, that sounds like me. Would you like to come and have a chat about it? And I bundled on down to Boscombe Down. What started off as a crew room chat turned very quickly into quite a detailed aerodynamics interview, which I hadn't prepared for and wasn't really expecting. After which I was asked to leave the room for a little while, and then 2 minutes later said, yeah, we want you to be a test pilot.
Wow.
Really? Well, not that clever. And then I thought, well, I'll be in Boscombe Down in 6 months' time. He said, no, you're going to America. I've just come back from there. No, you're going to America. Why? Oh, they've got better airplanes for... So I was destined at that point to be a Typhoon, RAF Typhoon test pilot. Mm-hmm. So you don't do the course and find out where you're going. You are put through the course to go somewhere specific.
Right, okay. So can you tell us some of the aircraft you tested over in the USAF?
Trained on, testing I suppose. Yeah, so the core airplanes were the T-38 and the T-2. F-18 was part of the school fleet. Lovely, the Beaver and the Otter, big tail dragger things. They open your eyes and make you use your feet again. There's a couple of helicopters, a couple of gliders in there. Got to fly the Tomcat as the end of course exercise. Wow. It's a big deal. You get 10 hours, go and fly this and produce the big report. So it's great fun, 10 hours, but there's a lot of writing comes after that. That was awesome. Flew the F-16 during that time. Pit special, got to taxi a B-52.
How'd you
didn't get it off the ground, something went wrong, we couldn't fly. So a good spectrum, I think 30 odd different types in the year. Oh, P-51 Mustang was the mid-course carrot to keep you going. Yeah. That was just lovely.
That's amazing. So would each aircraft be tested in a different way, or would it be the same syllabus for each aircraft?
On the course, it's very compartmentalised. You start off learning all the things about aircraft performance. Right. Then you go on to handling qualities, and then you go on to testing systems. And typically you would be taught how to test in one type, and then be given another type to go and test it yourself and produce a report on it. Right. So if you could be taught lateral directional handling qualities in the T2, but then be given a project to go and produce data from a different airplane. Yeah. And that's how you sort of put into practice what you've been taught. Right.
And was it a lot different from your military flying?
No, it's not. But the key thing about becoming a test pilot is that you're testing a product, mm-hmm. whether it's a new weapon, a new airplane, a new display, for it to be used by the guys on the front line. And you only know what that is because of the experience you have. So it's relating what you're testing to how it's going to be used. Because the scientists and the engineers build stuff and they go, oh, that would be great. Whereas the users often don't use it the way it was the engineers built it, or thought they. So being that interface between the end user and the designer builder was what the key skills to learn as a test pilot are.
So you were essentially working for the frontline guys, is that what you were kind of doing?
Yeah, as an RAF test pilot, my end user is the frontline guys. When I then left and joined industry, I'm obviously protecting the shareholders, but also looking after the guys on the front line because they're still my buddies.
Of course. This could be a difficult one or an easy one. What was your favourite aircraft you tested over there?
Tomcat.
And what was that like to fly compared to what you'd flown previously?
Well, it was it was eye-watering in terms of how big it is. We had the big engine B+ one, so its performance was even more than the Eagle in that terms. Its avionics weren't that great, but later models swapped that. But I think because it had some interesting handling qualities that you go, oh, that caught you out. The typical Top Gun flat spin heading out to sea thing. Yeah, that happens. That's real. Yeah. Big engines way wide apart, asymmetric thrust was an issue. So no, it was not quite the docile aeroplane the F-15 is in handling quality, but there was lots of interesting things to experience.
So yeah, how long did you spend over there, and could you tell us where you went after this?
The course is a year long, so I think I've probably spent 14 months by the time you get house and things sorted out, and come straight back from that into Boscombe Down, into the Fast Jet Test Squadron at Boscombe Down, where initially you get checked out on all the Tornado, the Hawk, the Hunter, anything else that's there, but start to become embedded in the Typhoon program. And that takes a while because it was a big complex program, so ground school on the aeroplane, simulators on the aeroplane, get up to Wharton, get embedded within the industry side of things, but keep that distance between industry and customer.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably about 18 months, maybe 15 months after getting back to Boscombe that I finally got to fly a Typhoon. But you're also doing other bits of testing on other projects.
So tell us about what it was like to fly the Typhoon in that first flight.
Oh, first flight was, I mean, at the time there was only 7 Typhoons in the world, and we were flying the Italian prototype, single-seat Italian prototype that had, when I got airborne, it had 15 hours on the clock. Flying, single-seat airplane that there are no proper simulators for, they're just rigs, there's not a certified thing. You're kind of self-taught. You've got a big team from the military. We were looking at the latest standard of engine that was in the airplane, so it was all engine performance testing. And you were there as the test pilot just to make sure you put the airplane to the exact conditions that the boffin on the ground says we need to test the engine here, there and there. And you also don't want to mess up because you've got something that's kind of unique. There's a lot of people watching you, but that's what the course prepares you for. Don't leave any stone unturned, make sure you prepare properly.
So the early days, was it mainly engine testing, like you said there, rather than the avionics side?
That was a specific exercise called a preview. So the customer got to do 4 previews over the development program. First one was handling quality, the second one was performance when the engine was more mature, and then later ones went there. That was a standalone thing that the military did. I also got to fly on anything as a military guy embedded at Wharton with the company. Okay. And then of course eventually I left the Air Force and jumped ship. We did all weapons, avionics, radar, all that testing.
So obviously the Typhoon was probably the most modern aircraft you've flown. How did that handle in the air?
Oh, amazing. The flight controls and the effort that got into refining the flight controls from this unstable aeroplane that just breathe on the stick and it did what you wanted it to do. You just felt exactly that it was going to do what you were thinking before you got there. And performance-wise too, I've flown the 14, the 15, the 16 and the 18, and yeah, they're all of a same performance that you'd have to get a force gauge and a stopwatch to measure it to find out which one is actually the best. Typhoon, you just feel it in your backside. There's a quantum leap in performance. Never had any problems with them. Even the development engines were great. And there's the stories now of engines spending over 1,000 hours in the airframe before they're out for overhaul. So amazing. And the reheat light up time was just staggering. You got power in instantly.
It looks almost instant from the videos I've seen.
And it's, the acceleration is about a third of what you get on an aircraft catapult shot.
Wow.
Just in a clean jet in decent conditions, but it's you're pinned in the seat.
So when you came to the Typhoon, you must have thought this was a quantum leap forward, of aircraft at the time.
Yes. A lot of work had gone into the design requirements, analysing the competition and analysing the threats, understanding what the performance of the airplane needed to be to beat those threats on a regular basis. So the Sukhoi 27 was the threat and how that was going to evolve, which history has shown that it did evolve in a way. But the airplane was, on paper, set out to be able to defeat that on a regular basis. Yeah. So it had all the right things: the performance, the handling qualities, the turning circle, G, weapons, radar, all the bits were there. A very complex program.
Yeah. So was it just designed as an air-to-air fighter at that time, or was it always designed to integrate into the air-to-ground role?
It's always at the very the first specification said it's primarily air-to-air, but with a secondary air-to-ground capability. So it was never ignored, it was always there. I don't think anybody really imagined it would come on to be as much of a multi-role platform as it is today.
So how many hours did you get on Typhoon, and overall did you enjoy testing it?
I didn't get that many. I was probably 250, 300 thereabouts over the time, because it's a development program. The airplanes weren't flying that much. Yeah, I ended up as the lead project pilot on the program, and the responsibilities that comes with that. But it's very much part of a big team of people. Yeah, you kind of go through test pilot school thinking that you're going to be the one in charge of everything, but you're not. You're just the driver who happens to be in the spotlight, and the one who can get it wrong if you mess up. Yeah. Only did that once, but.
So, Craig, overall, did you enjoy your RAF career?
Absolutely, and I never thought as a schoolboy I would join the military, but I couldn't have had a better career in there, and the thought of the alternative of being a BOAC co-pilot or British Airways, no, that didn't appeal. Still doesn't appeal to me. Great people, the working ethos, the teamwork, just lovely. Great.
Yeah, you certainly flew a lot of types, so you're a very lucky man.
I am a lucky man.
So Craig, you had a pretty big accident in the Hunter. Can you tell us about this?
I can, yeah. 1st of June 2003. We've been flying Hunter for many years, on and off at air displays and things. This weekend in question, we'd flown at the Portrush Air Show in Northern Ireland out of Blackpool, quite close to Wharton, so it was quite handy, really. We'd flown on the Friday, the Saturday, and then on the Sunday, the day of the accident. Kind of a long litany of problems. And they talk about the Swiss cheese effect or breaking the chain. And there's a number of issues that go into why the airplane eventually crashed and our involvement in it. Airplane had electrical problems, but it's got a battery, it's got second generators. That's okay. We can live with the one generator not working. But at some point during the sortie, that second generator failed. Not a problem. We've still got the battery. That'll keep us going. Kind of predicted that would happen, and the weather was fine. We could get back home to Exeter. Sorry. But midway through the transit back home, there's a little shudder through the airframe, which the Hunter quite often did. It was the inlet guide vanes moving. And then I noticed the speed was slowly reducing, so I moved the throttle forward a little bit, speed kept on reducing, moved the throttle forward a little bit more. And it did take me about a minute and a half to recognise the fact that the engine had actually gone out, it stopped working. I thought that in a single engine jet, when the engine stopped, it would all go deathly quiet. But the engine's still windmilling, the air conditioning's still working, the noise didn't really change, and all that's happening, the speed's getting slower, and I thought, oh no. This isn't going to end well. Very quickly put all the pieces together and recognise that this airplane is not going to start again. So can I get to a runway? Can I glide it into a runway? And Lambeda Airfield was just potentially in sight, but because I had underwing tanks on that I didn't want to jettison and not know where they're going to go, I kept them, which meant I couldn't get to Lambeda. So the next option was to put myself into the Duffy Estuary, or even better, get to Cardigan Bay. So I wanted to make sure that this airplane didn't end up in housing estate or anything like that. Long before the showroom tragedy, I didn't want the headline of weekend jet boy. Seriously was thinking that. So I stayed with the airplane as we're gliding down, and quite late on, about 2,000 feet, I initiated the ejection. That's civilian Craig Penrice flying. Had I been still in the Air Force, I would have been quite within my rights to leave the airplane at 9,000 feet and let it go to its own devices. I wanted to make sure I knew where it was going to land, just about. Pulled the handle, and in complete contrast to my previous ejection where I got no memory of anything, this time round I can see this cockpit disappearing away from me as I leave it at 100 feet per second, probably something like that. I don't know. I can't work out what the G-forces are, but you bang out of the airplane. I watch the airplane fly away underneath me. Then it pitches up because I'm no longer in it. The last vision of it is in the vertical before it nosed over and came back down. I know right away that I've damaged myself. My back is agony, absolutely excruciating agony. Parachute comes open and you're flopping around, and watching the water come up because I want to be over the estuary was fine. And I thought the water's coming up pretty quickly here. This is not a lot faster than I was expecting, and I glanced down and the ejection seat hadn't separated from me as it should do automatically. So I'm coming down in a tiny little parachute anyway with a 300-pound ejection seat strapped to my back. So at a very late stage I unstrapped from that. It fell to the floor and landed maybe 50 feet away from where I landed. I landed in the water. The parachute pulled me a little bit, but it collapsed. I sort of came to a stop, but I took a big breath as I hit the water and didn't float back to the surface. I couldn't figure out what was wrong because the water was only about 9 inches deep. So I'd hit the water and then the sand underneath it with a broken back from the ejection, which wasn't a great feeling.
There's that famous picture in the news of their back tail.
Yeah, well, the airplane just literally went like and straight into a peat bog. So the cockpit ended up sort of 30 feet underground. It was recovered, and my little overnight bag was recovered, and with the car keys in it, which was the important bit. So I was in the water. Luckily, the tide was going out at that stage. I could hear police sirens and things on the banks of the estuary. About 45 minutes later, there was a passerby walking his dog. I could see him. I was obviously lying on my back. I couldn't move. I knew my back was badly damaged. He's sort of approaching, wondering whether he's coming up to a body or not, so I waved, and he comes across. There's nothing he can do on his own. Got some water, and then the sky becomes filled with helicopters. There's the Valley Rescue Helicopter, the Chivenham Rescue Helicopter, and the North Wales Police are all there. Big yellow helicopter, a man comes down on a string and sort of takes control. At that point, up until that point, it's all self-preservation. When the professional services are on the scene, you go, huh, and onto backboard and taken to the nearest medical facility, which is part of the story that is important, because had I been a military pilot who'd ejected, they're told take him to the spinal centre at Nottingham. If you're a civilian, no matter if you've ejected from an airplane, take the casualty to the nearest medical facility. Aberystwyth District Hospital, as fine a place as it was, is no place for a broken back.
Right.
So I was then taken to Swansea overnight in an ambulance on the road with a broken back. Spent 5 days there before being transferred to Nottingham, and it was a week later before they put the nuts and bolts in to fix my back.
Wow, so you really were travelling about.
Oh yeah.
Bloody hell.
Emergency stop in an ambulance with a broken back is not a nice thing.
I can imagine. So did you know this was going to be the end of your flying career at this point?
No, it took a while for the full enormity of the damage I'd done. So the broken disc, broken vertebrae are one thing. There's also a heap of, because of the splinters, spinal cord damage, which has long-lasting effects in there. And I was given this sort of ultimatum: once your back is fixed again, which you will do, we take the metal out and you can fly again. But as it took them 12 hours to put it in, from the front, by the way, and it's going to take them equally long to get out. And I was at 44 years old at the time, having done everything I'd done. I thought, you know what, I don't need to be doing this. Yeah. Because nothing says that the next flight's not going to end up the same way.
Exactly, yeah.
So 2 ejections in 4,500 hours is way above average.
Yeah, but it's great to see that you're here and okay.
I've been incredibly unlucky, but incredibly lucky, thanks to Martin Baker, thanks to the rescue squadrons, thanks to the doctors, and thanks to all the support I've had. So I'm very lucky to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Craig, do you have any hobbies?
There's not a lot of time for hobbies at the moment. My wife and I adopted 3 kids 3 years ago, so quite young ones, so that keeps us pretty busy. But I do love getting into my shed and doing a bit of woodwork, turning a perfectly good bit of wood into sawdust and stuff like that. Used to say golf. Excuse me.
Do you have a favourite tipple?
Being a Scotsman, the old wee dram of an evening.
The favourite aircraft you've flown?
Because of the professional involvement in it, I think it has to be the Typhoon.
Yeah, brilliant.
You know, being pivotal in a lot of the things that happened, I feel very proud of that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And there's not many, but one you wish you could have flown that you haven't.
I very nearly got to fly in the flanker. I wish I'd had, just got thwarted at the last minute.
So what was that? So a brief overview of that story. What happened there?
It was thanks to the Hunter flying. We're at the Waddington Air Show, and I took the flanker test pilot flying in Hunter.
Oh, right.
Just not fishing to get anything in return, just because he was interested. We could do that. Then he came back and said, oh, "Okay, I take you in my airplane." Oh, great, thank you very much. But then it was, his enthusiasm was switched off by authorities. But no, I flew the MiG-29 in Germany.
Oh, wow.
Flew those ones, but interesting airplanes.
So which had the better climb rate, Typhoon, F-15 or Lightning, would you say?
Oh, climb rate. Oh, Typhoon by far.
Really? I was going to say Lightning then,
No, Typhoon by far.
So what do you get up to these days?
I work as an aerospace consultant. Anybody who needs some guidance or help mainly in the flight testing world. A lot of that work comes from China. China's got a huge blossoming aerospace industry and not a great depth of knowledge in history of it, so they're desperate for any assistance we can do, and they've got some interesting projects. And it's busy. I'm cracking on close to 60. It's time to start slowing down, I think.
Brilliant. Well, Craig, thanks very much for coming on the show and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.